unmuted. Go ahead and for everyone that's already here, we're going to begin with an audio check to make sure your speakers work. Do you guys want to go ahead and try that?
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
I guess so, because they can't tell. They can write in the chat.
Okay, we have a little bit of confirmation there. Excellent.
We're good. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name's Leah. I'm the marketing manager here at Two Hat Security. I'm just going to kind of get everything started here for Chris. I know he's super excited to present, so I just want to get some of our logistics out of the way first. So everyone's muted. I'm sure you've noticed that if you're talking and we haven't been responding. I'm just going to keep things a little bit simpler as we go through the presentation here. If you do have questions, though, just hit that Q&A button at the top of your screen there, and you can type in your questions, and we'll pause and get to them as best we can throughout the presentation here. So as you might know, this is actually a revised and updated version of the talk that Chris gave at GDC earlier this year. Back then it was called Trolls, the Cost of Doing Nothing. We've kind of made a few changes here, added some really cool data points and case studies, and really expanded on the moderation strategies to make it as useful as possible for everyone. So we're really excited to present it. So today's agenda, pretty simple. Chris is going to give you a little bit of background about himself. We're going to look at some pretty interesting statistics that kind of speak into the levels of toxicity that we're seeing online. And then we're actually going to dive right into those moderation strategies. Chris has 20 years of experience, so he knows what he's talking about. This is his bread and butter. So I'm gonna, and then after that, we'll have some time to answer any outstanding questions. And I'm gonna hand it off to Chris now, because I know he's eager to get started. Take it away.
Okay, turn on the video. There we go, there's me. Okay, and also that's me as well, as I was quite a bit younger at the time. And this is my first computer. Okay, so one of the questions we're gonna ask is how many people had a computer like that in the past. I mean, look at this. Look at that old phone with that radial dial, and there. Look at that. If you look very carefully at the disk drives, those are 5¼ inch drives. We didn't have a hard drive at the time. You had to put your DOS into the top one, and then you could load your program in the second one. So that was quite a long time ago. Been doing this for a bit, as many of us have. And part of my passion for the reason why I'm involved in this is I'm now a father of 4 children. I deeply care about making the internet a safer place and also tons and tons of fun. So we're going to introduce you to Carlos now. Carlos is going to be running the polls and a lot of the Q&A section. So take away, Carlos.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. So just a fun question to get everybody thinking about those old times there. How many of you have actually used a floppy disk? Let's just have let's have this question up for a few seconds here, and then we're going to check. Ooh, nice. Cool. That's fun. So 100% everybody has used this. That tells me a lot about our generation here that's participating. Excellent. So just share the results with you quickly here. And off you go, Chris.
That's awesome. Okay, and this other guy in the background is my brother. His name is Lance. We used to make games together. So he would do the art, I would do the programming. And as the years went by, we said, well, he really wanted to build a game for kids. And people said to him, don't build a game for kids. Kids don't have credit cards. You're never going to make any money. Also, you're going to get sued, because you remember back in 1999, all the chat rooms were really kind of scary places for kids to go. And so we said, well, why don't we just fix that? Why don't we just make a chat system that is so incredibly strong that it will actually allow for the community to grow? So we sat there and we had all these beta testers, and they would try to chat, and they would type, and then we would look at all the things they're doing. We're almost basically fixing the filter in real time. Like was it 1999, 2000, right around then? And by the way, I just got my brother to promise that he'll do a webinar in the future about the history of Club Penguin and how they built community and some of those techniques. So stay tuned for that one coming up sometime later on. So he built his game, and it ended up becoming quite popular. And he ended up coming up with this game. His game was called Club Penguin, and he grew it to 300 million users. And the idea of community was absolutely critically important to its success, because the people were so engaged in the game. Now, part of the community as well is they started developing their own theories about the game, their own conspiracies. And one of the conspiracies was they believed that you could flip the igloo. So for about 10 years, they were like standing on one side of the igloo, trying to get enough people on the igloo. They were like faking screenshots. They were doing, and we just kept quiet. We let the myth grow. We let it be whatever. We didn't want to disrupt the mythology of it. So finally, when they shut down the web version and moved to mobile, earlier this year, they finally did a real good treat for the community, and they flipped the igloo, which is what we're looking at now. It was really kind of fun, and it kind of built on that ethos. But the other thing about the community is that even though we hadn't worked there for years, we were able to go back into the community, and they still recognized us. And then they said, you know, everyone, we're going to do this presentation at GDC. Everyone say hi, game developers. And this is real screenshot of the community interacting with the team. So an amazing level of community, but more to come on that on a different session. So when you're building a community like that, there are a couple metrics that you must track. Now, forgive me for those that this is old news, but for the ones that are missing it, let's make sure we have this foundational knowledge. Key things that you need to track is the concept of user churn. User churn is the amount of users you're losing during any given period of time. So in the background, you can see a picture of a hill made of sand. Imagine you want to take your social product or game from 1 million users all the way up to 10. You have to like pile sand on top of a hill. So you're going from 1 million, and you pile sand all the way up until you get to 10 million. Well, the thing about sand is every time you dump a load of sand or you step on it, a bunch of it falls away. So every time you take 2 steps up, you lose 1 step down. So if you're spending $4.20 to buy users through advertising, it's going to cost you a lot of money to get enough users if a whole bunch of the sand is just falling away. So if all your users are leaving you, you have a problem. The second number is the concept of retention. That is, during a certain period of time, how many users did you retain during a given period of time? And in the industry, we typically talk about that as your D1, your D7, your D30, meaning how many users are still hanging around after day 1 or still hanging around after day 7 and day 30. Now, what we do in the industry is we segment our users. So we say, give me all the US users and give me all the European users. And when you take your US users and your European users, you can measure how many American users stayed at day 1 and how many European users stayed at day 1. And then you can know, is there a cultural artifact about your game or your product that it appeals more to a different audience? Now take that same concept of segmenting your users and measuring them differently, and you can take any concept that you want to measure and say, is it making a difference towards my retention? Because remember, and this is for a lot of us that are working on a business case to our boss about, hey, I want to do something about our moderation strategies. I want to put real attention to it. The best way of convincing your higher level executives is say, look, you can make more money. So if you're planning on spending $5 million on advertising to get your game out there, it'd be a lot better if that $5 million resulted in 1 million users versus 2 million users. It'd be better to have 2 million users than 1 million users. I'm sure most executives would be excited about that. So anything that you can find that makes that number bigger is good. So we were asked to do an in-depth study of a product out of Europe. It was a small community. We just segmented down to, I think it was a Turkish group or an English group or something like that for a first-person shooter out of Europe. And so what we did there is we tried to find which features were causing greater retention inside the game. And one that we found was a huge winner was people that had participated in chat. So what you're seeing here is the user segmentation. The red group, they did not participate in chat, and the blue group participated in chat, especially on day 1. What this shows is that the people that didn't participate in chat on day 1, they had a high account of quitting. And the people that did participate in chat were almost 3 times more likely to continue to play the game. So we're not exactly sure, we didn't get into the exact why, whether they came with friends in the first place or whether they made friends and that made them stay. But whatever it is, anything that's greater than like a single point of change is something that you want to pay attention to. And this is like a 300 points, which is amazing. So you can take that same concept of segmentation and you can measure other things. And so we give a big kudos out to Riot Games and the pioneer research that they did. So a few years ago in 2014, they announced at GDC, they said that they monitored the different groups of users, and the users that experience toxicity are more than 3 times more likely to quit. Now, for any of us that are looking for a case to say to our boss and say, look, toxicity is not good, we should stop. Imagine you've got this giant drain in your community of users and you're trying to climb that sandhill, and you've got a drain that people that experiences toxicity are going down that drain as fast as possible, or not to mix metaphors, like a revolving front door. let's keep the best way of growing the product is to keep the users we already have. So Riot Games shook up the whole industry when they said that, and people are like, wow, we need to take this seriously. So Carlos, back to you, poll number 2.
Excellent. So I wanted to ask everybody if there is toxicity in your product currently. Fun answer for you there. Okay, so I'm gonna leave it open for 10 more seconds here, so you get a chance to vote. Right, let's end the poll right now. I'm gonna share the results with everybody, so you can see that there's a large proportion of attendees here that are experiencing it. Somebody that maybe, so that's an interesting answer as well. How do you know that you're experiencing it? And 2 great answers.
You can't have a talk about trolling and toxicity without having a few people being creative. So I like this crowd. Okay, I want to go into the stats and the numbers behind toxicity and troll. And I realize that I'm preaching to the choir here because you came to this talk because you already believe that it's important. So the reason why we're going to these stats is some of you are building out a business case to talk to your boss about saying, look, we need to do something. And whether it's with us or someone else, the real point is we just need to do something about this because it's a big problem out there. So here's the numbers to give you support. So this one here should be enough to move any executive along, just to do anything. 13% of Americans say that they've stopped using an online service after witnessing others' users engage in harassment behavior. That's not even that they experienced it themselves, they just saw it happening to other people. So if there was anything that you could say you can lose 13% of all your users by it appearing inside your game, that would suck. Like if you look at how much energy we put into the game dynamics, making sure that everything in the game is properly balanced. So like this sword has a certain number of XP, and if you use this sword, it can't just automatically win every time you use it. The whole game needs to be balanced so that it's not unfair and cause other people to be upset and quit. Well, we should put the same attention into community dynamics. Our community mechanics should be just as important as our game mechanics because they greatly influence how people perceive the game to be fair, how they perceive the experience, and their whole pleasurableness of the system. Another stat, 52% of massive multiplayer online roleplay game players reported that they had been cyber victimized. 35% said they had committed cyberbullying themselves, which is kind of scary. So like half of the people are actually experiencing it themselves. If you go back to Riot Games stat, that's very scary because they're 3 times more likely to quit. If, of course, we have to clarify that is cyberbullying the same as toxicity, and that's a whole nother conversation as well to be more clear on the terms. But the point is that negative things are happening and is causing negative impacts on them. So, and then there was a recent study that came out of Stanford that says that essentially anyone can become a troll. So given the right situation, so if you walk into a game or a social network and everyone is being really toxic and that's kind of what people are doing, under the right conditions, people can also become very, very negative. So if they're being attacked or if everyone else is being attacked, they can just roll into it. So the problem is it's a spiral of negativity. So you want to kind of keep your community at a low level of toxicity. Preferably, my best guess is around 1%. But if it starts getting out of hand, it actually gets worse and worse and worse. And we see a lot of people are reporting that they're having up to 20% of toxicity. All right, so the next thing to talk about, we did a big study. So we commissioned SFU and hired some interns to do a giant study of toxicity and what's its impact it has on the actual health of a thing. So the key things we're measuring, the red one is the health. So health would be anything that grows. So that's what we consider health. So more users, more comments, more upvotes, more of things that are desirable in a community. And the blue one, or the teal kind of color, is the idea of a moving average of toxicity. So in this case here, this community was kicking around 20%, getting as high as almost 50% toxicity, and its impacts it has on health. We did an analysis of a whole bunch of communities. Now, our definition of toxicity, because we just ran billions of messages from Reddit through it, we looked for anything that was sort of negative. So including like really bad swearing terms, bullying, sexting, rape, those kinds of elements. And we wanted to see what was happening. So it was a very broad definition. So further studies, we want to go and say, how does each individual factor influence it? But our thesis was, if the site is toxic, people will quit. That was our thesis. Unfortunately, our thesis was not true. We just proved our thesis, and what we found out is that if a site is toxic, it can actually grow, which we were dangerously shocked by that stat. What that meant to us is that some sites, the purpose of the site is for people to be toxic. And so people go there because it's toxic, or people put up with the toxicity because there's so much value in the site that they're willing to put up with it. They have a level of resilience that can handle it. However, we did notice that even the most toxic communities, when the toxicity spiked, so you can see at the very beginning here, it initially went down, and when the toxicity went down, the health of the community went up, but then the toxicity spiked again, and then the health immediately started to drop again. Whenever there was an increase in toxicity, it always went down. So the conclusion of it was, every community has a different level of resilience to toxicity, and if someone pushes the bar too far, they have a threshold that it starts to break apart and fall apart. And it's our job as community people to figure out what is our threshold for our individualized system. So you can take that idea of community resilience and you can measure toxicity from low to high. And each community should have a different target. So if you're a child-directed site, you're basically building a playground for kids. And in real life, if you go to a playground, there's social norms that are expected. And if some kids walk in the playground and start swearing, it's perfectly acceptable to take them, ask them to refrain from speaking that language or to move to a different place. So each community has got a different level of expectations and an amount of resilience, because with kids, we don't want to create any harm to them. With teens, there's a little bit more ability to be more open and whatnot. And as you get into more mature audiences, they can handle quite a bit of content that is questionable. So what we discovered then, if you take that study of Reddit, is each community can be mapped to a level of toxicity that they're able to absorb, that they have the resilience to be able to handle. But then we started thinking about it some more, and it's not truly one-dimensional. For instance, take this illustration. When someone says something like, "I trade you gold," that may or may not be okay. Depends on the situation. Now, other than the grammar is terrible. But when someone says, "I trade you gold," that is potentially okay. But what is not okay is if someone says that 100 times in a row or 20 times in a row. Now they're gold farming, they're probably a bot, they're probably spamming. So we're familiar with this concept that something is okay. It's like a mosquito kind of buzzing around. But when you have tons and tons and tons of this annoying behavior, we kind of hate it. And that becomes in itself, so it's not that it was said once, but it was said multiple times. So even normal behavior or good behavior is problematic when it's said a lot. Secondly, you can take this to other kinds of topics, so like swearing. So imagine someone didn't actually swear, they just typed in a bunch of symbol and then the word "this." In a lot of environments, that would be okay. So if it was a teen-directed site or a mature audience, that would potentially be really okay. However, it would be crazy annoying if that's all someone ever said. So every single message they said was this form of kind of subtle fuddling the swear words kind of through. That would just be annoying behavior. And it would eventually grind the community down, and they'd get tired of that user, and they would start diminishing the value of the community and the community experience. So going back to our model, we actually need to change this model. And our traditional way of looking at community and community moderation, I believe, is incorrect. That we just look at it as this content is low risk, medium risk, or high risk. We have to add another axis or dimension to our model. And that is, how often does a user participate in that behavior? Because it's not a direct line. Our thresholds of cutting off and our tolerance levels runs on a diagonal. So when someone says something like, you know, "I want gold," or "buy me gold," it may be okay. It may fit under this content that's good. But if they keep doing it, eventually you can see they move along the horizontal axis, and it becomes a point where it's too much. So we see that a lot with spam, we see it with gold farming, we see it with people just generally, even with someone just saying hello. They could just say hello, 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 and they spam it, and they do that 10 times a second for like 1,000 times. They destroyed the conversation because no one else can participate. So even good phrases can become problematic if they start flooding the whole system. So part of our line is we have to draw a line in the sand, individual for each community. So this is not a line, this is not where your line is going to be. You need to figure that out. You need to figure out where is your line that is, what is the stuff that you don't care about at all? So part of the most common languages of hello, how are you, be right back, come to my place, let's play a game, that all makes up 95% of all chat-based conversations. I mean, this is general rule of thumb that we see across the whole industry. About 95% of that conversation is completely useless. In fact, people are so worried about, like people being Big Brother and reading the chat. If you've actually ever read the chat, it is so insanely boring of people like, hey, how are you? Oh, okay. And it's just like, there's not even a conversation going on. It's just so bad. So that's the majority of all this stuff that we're spending all this money to try to protect, is this people just saying, it's just terrible, just like I am right now. Okay, let's keep moving before we lose everyone. Okay, so then there's another one, is you have to draw a second line in the sand and say, this here is obviously bad. So there's a certain point in your community where enough is enough. And that'll be different based on your community. So if it's child-directed, I mean, that one's kind of blatantly obvious. Like if it's swearing, if people are sharing their personal information, if people are trying to be a bully, you just cut the line really, really low. However, it gets really hard if you're doing like a really mature audience stuff. You have to like draw it on like, okay, now we're talking about rape, we're talking about, abusing children, we're talking about those things that you never want to have happen in your site. So that becomes, whenever it happens, you just don't want it. And typically we find that about 1% of content is going to be that negative. There's just a certain percentage of people that want to push the boundary. And you're always going to have that certain level of people that push the boundary. And if you have a boundary, in fact, what happens, a lot of people just back off and they're like, okay, now I know what the boundary is. I know what the community is for. So now I'm going to stay within that. And then there's still a percentage of people within that this is their thing. They want to annoy you and break your system and make fun of you. And so they'll just keep breaking it. And then there's a whole other section, which I think is the most important part where technology is moving, is how do you deal with the gray area? How do you deal with a phrase that is neither good nor bad? So the easiest example here is for child-directed sites. Let's say we don't want them to be involved in sexting online. Makes a lot of sense. Sexting is the easiest one to pick about for gray, because as soon as you say you can't use a term, they'll use a different word. And if you say wink, wink, nudge, nudge after any phrase, it can become sexual. And if the culture is not allowed a term, they'll start turning that term into a sexual term. So even like simple words like lollipop, right? It's like kids' candy and stuff like that. But a musical term will come out on the radio, and a band will start using lollipop to refer to certain female body parts. And I want to lick your, anyhow, this might be a mixed audience, so I'll stop there. But a single phrase can instantly become problematic and land in that gray area. How do you deal with that? Because if you were going to solve the problem, you have to filter 100% of every cotton picking word that's in the language. And that doesn't work. So you can't just filter everything, because then you get what they call a stupid filter. And everyone, including the audience, makes like your users start making fun of it. So I want to show a sophisticated way of being able to deal with using the latest versions of the thoughts. And these are not all my ideas, emerging ideas all together with really brilliant people in the industry. So you can have different actions based on it. So if it happens once or twice or 3 times, and it's like the most worst thing that you never want to happen in your site, just filter it. If it is happening in that gray zone, that's a great use of your audience to be able to crowdsource it. I'm going to go each of these in much more detail. If they continue to cause problems, let's try to reform their behavior, restrict their behavior. If they are consistently saying things that are above your threshold, then you can start banning, blocking, escalating, have humans review. Okay, let's dive into these deeper, one by one. Okay, filtering, warning, trying to actually just get rid of the worst content. Carlos, back to you.
Thank you. I'll make sure that I'm speaking up now so everybody can hear me. So our next one here, we want to make sure that you're seeing the poll. I'll give you a little bit of time because I know that somebody wasn't able to vote before. So the question is, are you currently using a filter in your product? I'll give you a nice time here to vote. It's nice to have everybody's participation. Excellent. Just a few more seconds. Okay, thank you very much for voting. And you can see the results right now, actually. I have 78% of attendees using a filter currently.
Yes, there's a filter in coffee. So technically 100% like filters. Unless, well, there's a French press, but it's kind of a filter, kind of not sure. Okay, your first line of defense is a filter. So when you create a community, you get to establish the norms of the community. You want to set it off in a certain direction. When people walk in your front door for your community, the first thing that they're asking themselves is, what is this community about? Why was it created? What am I supposed to do here? And you get to set that tone when you do it. So in real life, what we do is when we create a different kind of community, there's certain expectations that go with it. And so if you create a playground for children, which is like our children's virtual worlds, there's certain expectations that go along that, and there's parents and teachers and whatever else that are helping kind of conform that behavior. As well as if you create like a big giant sports arena, which a lot of our games are focusing on, is like these, you know, massive sports. There's a certain expectation of sportsmanship and a certain behaviors that go with it, both from the crowd and from the people that are in the audience, that are actually actively engaged in the game. And if for other games, you can kind of describe them more like a nightclub. So people have decided to create a nightclub, and every nightclub gets to set the tone of the community based on the music, the lighting, the stuff that's in there. So if you set a giant like dance floor, you're gonna expect people to start dancing. Or in the case of a pub, if you set up a giant Jenga board, people are gonna be playing Jenga. So you're setting the direction of the community and what kind of nature it is. Well, in a nightclub, you put a bouncer at the front door, and it sends a signal to everyone that this is the expectation, that if you get out of line and you start acting inappropriately and towards the safety of other people in this party, you're out of here. And that's part of what you do. So you want to have that first line of defense, and you want to make sure people are aware that it exists. So it sets that expectations, and people under most social norms are going to conform to the expectations of what the community is for. So you want to focus on the worst content that there is, because if you target that gray-based content, all you're ever going to do is you're going to constantly overfilter and cause a lot of frustration with your users. Keeping in mind that when you add a filter, you've now created essentially what you call a mini game. So a lot of your users, no, a lot, some, less than 1% typically, are going to make it their journey in life to try to break your system. To them, that is a game all in itself. And keep in mind that they have far more time than you. So if you imagine that if you got 300 million teens playing your site, I can guarantee you they have a lot more time than your staff. And another trick is that if you have a really good filter, you're going to have less reported content. So I'll talk about that a little bit later, but we actually had one of our clients came to us and said, we have so much reported content, it's costing us so much human work. Could you help us automatically reduce our reported content? We said, sure. So we worked on it for a little while, and then we said our conclusion for the whole matter is, if you would filter this content in the first place, it would not be reported. So they did, and they had a massive win. So it turned out pretty good. So here's some, people said to us, okay, you've been saying for 5 years, you need to actually apply a filter and just give me the evidence that it actually makes a difference. So we found a game called Friendbase. It's like a virtual world. You can walk out, you can have this little environment, your little avatar, and you can chat to people. Well, when they launched it years ago, they didn't have a very strong filter. They had a simplistic filter, and to make it harder, it was in multiple languages. So they launched it, and unfortunately, because of the weakness in the filter, there was a really high user churn rate, and they developed a very toxic environment. So imagine if you walk into a game, and the first thing you're greeted with is some negative comments, and you shouldn't be here, and you're a noob, and all that kind of content. They had a really hard time retaining their people. So we did a challenge with them and said, well, why don't we do this? Let's measure your retention rate today before you start. And then let's go after a few months, let's measure your retention rate, and don't change anything else, just add the filter. We were expecting single digits, like we were expecting maybe 9% increase in retention. We're like, hey, that would be a win. We were blown off our socks when it turned out that we doubled their D30 retention rate. So the people that stayed at 30 days was twice as much. So it was a radical difference for them. And I think that would be an extreme example, but I bet you there's some more out there that could really benefit from just taking care of the simple stuff. Well, there's another example. Habbo Hotel's been around for a long time, also a virtual world. And they wanted to filter it across multiple languages. So if you want to go multiple languages, if you have to hire staff 24/7 in each language that you have to be able to maintain that, that's a lot of cost. And trying to maintain the quality across the multiple sites is really, really hard. So by adding a filter with our technology, they reduced their moderation workload by 70% across multiple languages. So it was a huge benefit. So I share these stats so that you've got some evidence so you can say that it actually makes a difference. Because a lot of people want to make a change, but they just need the ammunition to say it's worthwhile to make a change. And both these case studies are available on our website. So now I want to go beyond this and talk about what else is happening in the industry, because we're not the only ones that are making radical changes in the industry. I want to give special kudos to a group over at Twitch that have been very, very creative. So using similar concepts, they've been able to say each channel, so Twitch, of course, live broadcasting of people playing a game, There's chat along the side. It's really important that that chat is engaging. People are involved in it. It's safe. It's you know, it helps people draw them in and participate in the conversation deeper. Well, each channel needs to have control over how that conversation is happening, because there's some channels that are child directed, and there's some channels that are going to be teen directed. Of course, Switch might say, you know, be able to give you better clarification, but just as simplistic, that would be a great way of kind of pointing it. So if you could give each channel the choice of being able to declare this channel is designed to be rated E for everyone. So if you don't like swearing, you don't like all that kind of stuff, and people having sex online and people bullying each other, this is a great channel to watch. You're going to enjoy it. So then the channel can be able to drive their own direction. And I can imagine that this is a very transferable concept. So if your system has got concepts like guilds, clans, alliances, channels, wouldn't it be great if those groups can specify and say, the purpose of our clan is going to be for everyone. And then when people are going through and they're saying, I want to join a different clan, they can see the rating level and they can only join stuff that they're going to be comfortable with. Moreover, if you know the behavior of your users, you know that they never swear and they never have sex online, you want to only show to them the clans and the guilds that either their really good friends are in, or all the content that is going to be matched with the kind of behavior that they have. All right, so go back to our diagram and let's move over to the block about banning and blocking. So you now have a filter in place. You've gotten rid of the worst content, but what do you do if someone keeps pressing the limits? They keep pushing the boundaries. They won't give up. They keep going on. Poll number 4, over to Carlos.
All right. So with this one here, we are asking what percentage of your users are toxic, if you have that stat. And I have some categories there that can fit your answer. So leaving it up for a few more seconds here to give everybody a chance. Okay, lots of votes. That's great. A little bit more, if that's a hard question to pinpoint.
I wonder how many people are actually going to their dashboard and they're pulling something up right now.
The stats right now, yeah.
So you don't need to be that exact, I suppose, but.
So there you go. We have the.
Oh, what do we got?
Have the results here. 40% have experienced, know that it's less than 10%.
Awesome.
And 27%, it's actually less than 20%. Nobody said more than 20%.
Good.
Which is good. But we had a few answers like, how would I know?
Okay. Well, how would you know that one? That's a good question. So the question is, what percentage of your users are toxic? So if you're able to measure, let's say you have a whole bunch of signatures that like, these are toxic expressions that you want to know. Now, Carlos, I just had a message come out, so my connection's unstable. So let me know if anyone's having problems hearing.
Okay, and there was a really good comment too that depends on the definition of toxic.
Oh, right.
As well, right?
Right.
That's a great comment, John. Thank you very much for the feedback.
Okay, so I would suggest go through your chat logs and just mark, take 10,000 chat logs and mark toxic, not toxic, toxic, not toxic, and then do a count. Like what percentage of your chat logs are toxic? And then also take a look at your users and say, of those users, how many of those users are generating that toxicity? Because those numbers aren't going to be the same. So you might have 5% toxicity in your chat, but it might be generated by only 1% of your users. So that could be one way of doing it. Or you could apply a filter and you could do it, and then you could quality control the results to make sure you agree that what's defined as toxic is toxic. How are we doing for time? We're actually doing pretty good for time. Did we have any key questions that we wanted to address at this time?
Okay, we had a question come up here. So what is our definition of toxicity?
Well, that's actually a really good definition. So toxic, I would say, is like the term poison. And so if you inject poison into an organism, it begins to die. So toxicity is anything that when it's injected into your community begins to cause people to quit and die. Typically, I would say things that are strong racist hate speech that make people feel highly unwelcome, things that are like highly sexual, like rape, trying to cause someone to feel threatened, cases of people swearing repeatedly so that people are just, becoming ground down and feel uncomfortable, which is that goes on a vertical axis, remember? So it's not that they did it once, but they keep doing it. So it's that ongoing persistence. Actually, let me touch on that one really briefly. The definition of cyberbullying is not that someone said something one time, but part of the qualifying definition of cyberbullying is that it's ongoing and somewhat unescapable, and it causes psychological harm. So if you can take the same thing and apply it to toxicity and say that there's a certain element of ongoing, it is pervasive or unescapable, and it's causing harm. So I'm not going to get, I'd say that each community needs to define a little bit of toxicity, but you know, this would be a good discussion, Carlos, for your group on the behavior group that you're meeting with some of the top game industries with, is maybe we should come up with an industry standard definition of toxicity. I think we could use one, or someone already has one. Someone might, if you have one already, just throw it on the Q&A. We can announce it during this call. Is there another question we wanted to pick up on?
No, we have a really good input here, which is an answer to say that it's very few are inherently toxic, with a larger cloud of players could be toxic depending on context, perceived provocation. So
okay, break that down for me a little bit.
All right, so very few are inherently toxic.
Okay.
With a larger cloud of players could be toxic depending on context, perceived provocation.
Right. Okay.
And I would just also add a comment from my side here that even based on where you draw the line of when enough is enough in your community, I believe that definition of toxicity will also depend on your community.
Yes.
Very much so.
Yeah, and on a humorous answer to the question, toxicity is anything that I don't like. So, but that's not true. That's the funny definition that unfortunately we're seeing in culture is people are over defining things as toxic or bullying or whatever. And it's not actually toxicity or bullying. They're being a little bit, they need to lighten up a little bit and have some resilience. So I do believe we need an industry definition of toxicity. Let's stuff that in as a conversation that that the team, that the behavior group can work on together as cross industry. All right, I'm going to go through, keep adding more questions so we can pull those out. So here's the thing: is if you filter, you really need to ban, because if there are X number of million users and there's only X number or Y number of your staff. So let's say you have 300 million users and you've got 3 dozen staff, or whatever number your ratios are. There's more of them than there's of you. And if it's a mini game to a bunch of them, they have a lot of time. If you're given unlimited tries, eventually your technology will fail. Even the best technology, any filter that you use will fail at one point if people are given unlimited tries. Because there's 3 million Unicode characters, and they will just keep going through them until something shows what they want to say. So what we had found, actually I'll go back to that story just a little bit. So a real world scenario, but I can't give the name of the client. They had millions of users and they're actively trying to break our filter. And it turned out that they would end up, eventually their users would break our filter at least once a month. So every month our alarms would go off inside our internal system. And it's like, when that happens, all staff stop what you're doing and everyone go and fix this scenario, because it's a kids directed site and people are swearing on this kids directed site. So stop what you're doing. And then within a few hours, we'd do a hot fix and we push it live. But what we did is we said to them, look, you're giving your audience unlimited attempts to break the filter. If you would just, after they've done it a certain number of times, I don't care what number, whether it's 5 or 7 or whatever, could you just ban them? So ban them for 24 hours. If they get a second ban, it'll be 48. If they do another ban, 72, and then just ban them forever because they're not contributing to your community. Well, after they implemented that, they've been really, really quiet ever since. Their community has been growing regularly. And I think we've had about 2 of those like instant needed hot fixes in the last 2 years. So it really makes a huge difference, and I recommend don't let them have unlimited attempts. So this is another thing that you can do. So this is actually the thesis of why I created the product and why I got started in this whole thing in the first place. So it's based on the idea that if a network is being attacked, like not speaking about chat anymore, we're speaking about network security. So someone's trying to denial of service your network. The first thing that you do is you look at the packet behavior and say, is it coming from the same IP address? Is it have the same speed? Does it have, like, what's similar about all the traffic that's attacking your network? If you could figure out the signals about what's causing you a problem with your denial of service attack, you can then change your firewall. And you can deal with just the people that are causing you the problem, which the beauty of that means you don't have to firewall everyone off with such strictness. You can just have the people that are causing you problems. So that's what we do in security. If you apply it to chat filtering, what happens is there's people that are attacking your social network with different expressions, but they always follow the same pattern. So look at the example I have on the side, and I chose to use just a simple word because it's mixed audience that we have in the crowd, and we're going to make this available online afterwards. So we know that they always follow the same pattern. The first thing they always do is they just type in the word as is just to see if a filter is there. So type in F-U-C-K or whatever word it's going to be. Is there a filter? And then they start doing like F dot, U dot, and then they go on with that. And then they try lead speak, and they say, and to them it's become a game. Now, most people, they'll type in the like F-U-C-K and they'll press enter, it'll say it's filtered, and they stop. But the ones that you care about are the ones that go on and become creative. Now, if you create a series of signatures, if you can create a massive list of signatures of like, take for instance, the third from the top. If anyone ever types that in, the only time that expression ever occurs is because someone's deliberately trying to break the filter. Same with the fifth and the sixth and seventh and onwards. And you can see that they're going to get more and more creative as they go along. Well, by the time they get to the fourth one, if they've already matched 2 or 3 signatures, you already know the song and dance already. So what you can say is, I'm going to turn the filter up only for you. And so you don't have to worry about finding all variations of the 3 or some odd million Unicode characters. You can just simply deal with the worst users as it is. So having a database of millions of really bad signatures that happen on someone else's site is very, 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 very valuable. Yeah, Carlos's question.
Yeah, so I have a great input from Ruth here. Thank you so much, Ruth. She said that Twitch has 2 major definitions of toxic user.
Ah, good.
So users who use more high-risk languages than the norms of the community. And also the users who routinely break the rules of a channel. For instance, ban evaders who keep making new accounts to come back and harass.
That's really good. Thank you, Ruth. Okay, I come from a programming background, so I wanted to throw a little bit of fun into here. Everyone will have a different definition of fun and how you perceive this. But for a matter of humor, I decided to define this in code. So this is my next point, is don't ban users by counting points against a user. So some people, when they start off on the system, they make a terrible mistake, which is every time someone says a bad word, add points. So give them like 2 points for a mild one and 5 points for a severe one. Well, there's a huge problem with that. And the logic goes like this. If user says bad word, add to the user bad points. However, if the bad word has a potential of having false positives, so if there's a chance that you actually got some of your words wrong and someone could use a real word and it actually gets marked as a bad word. So let's say you've got a 1% false positive rate and the best users that you have are actually say a lot of things. So that's the key thing. What's going to happen is your best users are going to get screwed because your best users are going to make 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 chat lines. The probability that they're going to get a false positive is going to be incredibly high. And your best users are the ones that are going to get banned and punished and screwed, and your game is going to be done. So that's what the code there kind of says. So the point is don't just count, how many times someone's been bad. You have to have a window of time or a floating average or some kind of mechanism that lets them heal so the false positives don't creep up to them. Because this is computers, they're going to struggle, but they're starting to get pretty good. Okay, let's go into the next technique. But do we have any questions about banning techniques or anything like that in the list there, Carlos?
Not yet, but we are accepting questions here, so please feel free.
All right, and I can go back to it as well. All right, so crowdsourcing. I hear a lot of really good work happening with crowdsourcing. That seems to be a lot of people's first reaction is let's just crowdsource it. So the most simplest version of crowdsourcing is if a user has got a problem with the conversation, they can mute the other user themselves, right? So that's like the most common thing is like, if you don't like it, you can do the work of muting. Now that'd be absolutely basic, as well as if a user doesn't like it, they can push a button and say, I report this user. Those would be the simplest form of crowdsourcing. Better forms of crowdsourcing would be, you've got users that are deeply committed to your product. They love your product, they're whatever, and you give them an elevated level of permissions. So whether they run a guild or a clan or alliance, or they run a community, or they're volunteer community managers. So that is a very strong sense of crowdsourcing. Now, let's come to the heart of the matter, though. If you have people that love your community, they probably are also the ones that are paying you the most amount of money, and they're the ones that are inviting the most amount of people into your system. Why on earth would we show them content that we already know is bad? Because they're going to get discouraged, they're going to get worn down, they're going to get defeated. They're going to like in the industry, I mean, we all know that like if you get more into the social networks where people start having child exploitation and child pornography and stuff like that, people actually get post-traumatic stress disorder by seeing some of that content over and over again. Why would we expose volunteers to the worst content on the internet when we already know it's bad? So you have to, if you're going to crowdsource, by George, have a first line of defense. So sorry about the by George there. It's just way callback. We'll just blame it on being Canadian or whatever. And all my Canadians on the call are like, hey, don't blame Canada. So anyhow, so you have to have a first line of defense. So once you've gotten rid of the worst content that there is, now they're doing meaningful work. And if they're doing meaningful work, they're going to feel that they're actually contributing to your community. And then they become a very, very high value asset. So now they covered that. Let's go through the simplest form of crowdsourcing is reported content. I'm going to pull up Facebook because they did a pretty darn good job of how it is. And I'm going to go through the steps and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, that's so much programming to do this. And I'll explain why it's actually a good idea. So let's say you see something offensive on Facebook, then you can report it. You push the report button and then you give a reason why. And I'll explain why this slide is particularly important in a moment. And then let's say I think it's inappropriate for Facebook, and then you can choose a reason why. It's rude, it's vulgar, it's sexual, whatever. Let's say I choose that it's racist and hate speech. And then from there, they're gonna say, well, what kind of racist hate speech? A race or ethnic group, religious group, a gender orientation, etc. And then once I choose one of those, it says, thank you, a report's been submitted for review. Here are some tips that you can do. You can block Jane. You can mute them. You can kick them out of your clan. You can do all of those kinds of things. So you can give some really good tips here. Now, this is probably overkill for a lot of our products, but let me explain why this may be good. I don't know Facebook's logic behind it, but I know what's worked in other sites. Going back to that very first question here, I was one product that I was helping out, and they had a large number of people find, because every time you get one of these reports, a human needs to look at it. And in Germany, they're proposing a regulation that says that if you get someone reporting racist hate speech, and you don't deal with it within 48 hours, your company can be fined up to 50 million euros. And an individual on your team has to be appointed as the person that deals with those reports, and they can be fined, I believe it's up to 1 million euros as well, individually. Like, oh my goodness, I just kind of hope that doesn't get passed, but it may be really helpful for it. So if you get reports, you're gonna have to deal with it, which means human work. So one of the companies, they said, well, we got too many reports. So they did this really neat trick. And they said, what if reports, all they are is similar to a Facebook unlike? Like, people just want to give feedback and saying, I didn't like it. I don't like this content. Because in the industry standard, here's a general rule of thumb. 95% of the reports that you get are going to be junk. Only 5% are actually going to be bad enough that you're going to ban a user because of what's happening. Well, if that's true, can you reduce the noise? So what one product did is they put this, the one message. So if you chose, essentially, it's annoying or not interesting, they would essentially say in programming terms, they'd send it to dev null. So a person was able to express themselves, but it went nowhere. It didn't actually file a case. By doing that, they reduced the reports by 50%, just by giving people that optionality just to give their feedback, and then they don't have to deal with it. So then you go into more specifics. And why would you want to go into more specifics? Because you're going to find out that later on, after you have a huge amount of reports, you're going to train AI on it. So you're going to take your reports and you're going to record the decisions your humans make, and then you're going to have a whole bunch of reasons why they chose those decisions, and a computer is going to try to figure it out. So the more data you have, it's going to figure out that when it's sexually explicit and certain terms appear and images are highly, like all these different conditions are probable, the computer is going to be more accurate at predicting your human decision. And as a result, you don't have to do as much work. So by putting that work in up front, you can develop better features to train your AI against. All right. So here's what you can get from an AI on the right. So we built this out for one of our clients that wanted to reduce the whole thing about they didn't want as many reports. And so what we did is we separated all the reports into 3 buckets. So there's the ones that, these ones here are obviously bad. Just like, obviously you're gonna ban the user. This is what your moderators are gonna likely do. And obviously good. So our assumption was, if it's gonna be obviously good, we're willing to accept an error rate there, because we assume that if it's bad, people will report it a second time. And one of our features for our AI is, how many times has someone reported it in the last 24 hours? So if it gets reported more often, it goes up the buckets, and eventually it goes to human review or obviously bad because of the number of times it's reported X24. The client's goal was, I want to reduce the human work by 50%. I want you to automatically predict 50% of the answers. And we got just less than 1% of an error rate on stuff that we automatically banned. Now, if you read those logs, you wouldn't be too offended by it. It's like, we got it wrong, but it still was bad to the most part. And that is an acceptable business case that you'd make. And then on the bottom there, as I mentioned, we just let it be reported again. So what you can do to reduce your reports is you can have that workflow of like, ask them different questions, try to send some stuff to dev null or just get rid of it as a Facebook unlike concept. And then use your AI or get us to train an AI for you that automatically predicts what your humans are going to be doing. All right, there's a question.
Yes, we have a question here. How do you deal with people gamifying your report system, maliciously reporting someone innocent to get them punished or as a joke? And that question is from Ruth.
Thank you, Ruth. So 95% of reports are going to be in that category. They're jealous. They are. They just want to cause trouble. They're going to gang bully someone, so they get like. So I've seen some systems that are written to be they can exploit it because their system is if a user is reported 7 times in 24 hours, automatically ban the account. Well, that's ripe for bullying because you just need 7 people that want to pick on a person, and then they're going to get auto banned. So you want to use mechanisms such as clarifying with the reports. Is this try to validate which ones are actually high likelihoods of being successful. So then you've kind of narrowed it down. So if someone says that they shared a sexually explicit picture, and there was no picture shared, like your computer can figure that out, then you can discard that report. So your AI can start doing that as one of your feature matrices. How many pictures have they shared? Based on the AI of the computer, did they discover that it was pornography, etc. Now, going back to the game industry, I guess that'd be for profiles and forums. So the other thing you can do is your AI can start predicting when is a good one and when is it not. But unfortunately, you're always going to need that human in the loop to make decisions because the reason why it's being reported is automation didn't detect it in the first place. So it's in that gray category, so it's subtle and it's those kinds of elements. So do you think I answered Ruth's question? And feel free to ask again, Ruth, if it's not fully clear. So more questions?
Not inside.
Okay, we'll keep burning through. So our last section we want to deal with is the reform area. So we want to reform or we want to restrict content. So imagine a scenario where a user just keeps saying content that's in the gray zone and they just keep going on with it. So okay, so what happens then is we're gonna have the ability to warn users. So what we can do with that is if someone keeps being negative and keeps going on with that, we want to let them know that their action is going to cause problems and those kinds of things. And what I really want to touch on here is that there's this element, there's a really good study done by a group or a young 14-year-old girl, and she created a thing called rethinkwords.org. You can go there and read her study. And her thesis was, this is in regard to cyberbullying, is that adolescents don't have the full part of the prefrontal cortex of their brain fully developed. They don't understand the cause and effect. So if I go out and get completely plastered and drunk tonight, it's going to influence my test results tomorrow. But if you were to tell them, look, before you go out and get completely plastered and drunk, remember you have a test tomorrow, sometimes they'll make a different decision. And so she did a test of that, and she said when people are about to type a bullying message, if you pop up a message and say, are you sure you want to post this because some people may interpret it as bullying, 93% of the time, adolescents changed their mind and didn't post that message. So can you imagine that in a game context, that if you posted a message and say, are you sure you want to post this because it may be considered unsportsmanship-like, which is the big theme that we're going towards for this year, not just us, but the whole larger network of games and big players. We're focusing on sportsmanship in order to solve some of these issues of toxicity. And so you may be considered unsportsmanship. I wonder how many people would not post that message if they were confronted with the idea that they may be considered to be unsportsmanship-like. So it's kind of like this. If this cat knew the consequence of pushing the button, would they still push the button? I think this cat would, but some users might not. Okay, other creative ways, and we're just about wrapping it up, is you can auto-mute users. So after you've been involved in a couple times of doing stuff, it can just automatically mute you. We still want to collect money from you of having you buy in-game items and doing those kinds of things. Just don't talk to our community. So this is similar to a ban, but in this case, they're just not talking. I saw an amazing experience. I was playing Tanky online with my nephew, and this person started spamming the channel. I can't remember what they were saying, something like, Anyways, let's just imagine it was like, hello, 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 and they just wrote it. And when they got to about 10, all of a sudden, all of their chat disappeared. So like, from my perspective, I saw this person spamming the channel, and then it all just disappeared. It was so funny, and it's like, I think that's really effective because we took away their reward and those kinds of things. And then there's the idea of a fake send. We did this at Club Penguin all the time, is that it was such a, so many people online, the conversation was going across the screen so fast, it really didn't, you couldn't actually read it anyhow. So what we do is that if anyone said anything negative, like not negative, like swearing and those kinds of things, we would show it on their screen so they think they said it, but no one else on the entire world got to see it. Well, as a result, it was the funniest consequence is we actually observed that people changed their behavior because they only got social reward when they said positive things. So when they said, do you want to play a game? People responded to them. But when they yelled at them, screamed them, and told them they were an idiot and a noob and all those kinds of things, they got no feedback and response because no one saw it. So they changed their behavior and they did what got rewarded. And finally, as my last point, let's do really good matchmaking. So for instance, if you know that your user is a negative user who is pushing the boundaries of toxicity, not bad enough to ban, but they're pushing the boundary, by all means, do not have them matchmake with brand new users. Because they're brand new users, that's their impression of what the game is about. Introduce your brand new users to your best and your top users who are going to show them and model for them what kind of expectations and what kind of game this is all about. So conclusion, if you have really smart moderation techniques, you can increase your retention, which may mean as much as 2 times increase of retention. Your mileage will vary, which means more profits, more loyal community, they'll stay around longer. Okay, Q&A stuff. Back to Carlos.
All right, so we're just going to open up for everybody here to be able to ask questions at this point. And we want to make sure that it's really interactive, and please ask away.
That's an interesting question. Does anyone else have another one? How do you get the presentation? So that's a great one. Thank you. So Leah, how are you going to publish this one?
Pardon me. Yeah. So just as a bit of follow-up here, what we'll be doing, once the call is over, we have a few minutes left here. I'll be sending out a follow-up email to everyone who attended. We'll actually have a PDF of the presentation will be available too, and I'll make sure there's some pieces in it, pardon me, that Chris talked about that aren't in the presentation itself. So we'll make sure that all those things are in there so you get a really full picture of the talk today. So we'll make sure that's available to everyone.
Right. Now, some people couldn't make it, or they have colleagues after they've heard this, they might want, someone in particular that needs to hear this information. Will we have this available online?
The presentation itself? We should. We haven't quite figured out what that's going to look like, but that is the plan to have it available for sure.
Okay, have a great question here from Gary. How does support for multiple languages complicate this process?
It sure does.
So, because you have to know, like, so if you're doing an approach of like, let's find that signature of those people that are breaking the network or causing problems, you have to know that across all languages. And different languages are more complex, right? So English is a relatively easy language in regards to word form and tense. I mean, we don't even have a second person plural or second person, whatever. Like the word you and you is the same word. Other languages actually have like a whole bunch of tenses. So it becomes really complicated. Okay, so, but how do you do it? Is, well, you either hire people that are language specialists and they go and monitor the channels and deal with it individually, or you work with an automation company that is able to do a lot of the heavy lifting and get rid of the worst, and then you can let your crowdsourcing of your community deal with the leftover problems.
Excellent. So we have another question too. We have, how do you identify the various accounts that are being created by the same user?
Yeah, okay, so here's a secret for this group. Take a look at the password. So I've always wanted to check this one here. For some reason, people assume, this is my thesis, is that people assume that their password is never viewed or seen, stuff like that, because instantly you're gonna salt it. But prior to salting the password, before you encrypt the password, take a look at it and see if it matches the salts of a generic list of passwords that are within the system. And if it lines up with counts that are bot orientated, no one's gonna expect you to be checking the password. So same with like their email address, they're gonna do something like, like hello@2@security, which is how you can get a hold of us. Or you could do hello Plus, with using Gmail, you can trick the system, and if you just add a plus sign, you can add anything you want. You get a unique email, but it goes to your same address. So check that origin part, as well as there's databases of IP addresses that are using a proxy server or are using the dark web in order to connect to your, or Tor network in order to connect to your network. Those ones I would count as more suspicious. Any other good suggestions on that? Usually within their first 10 messages, you know what they are. So if their first 10 messages is go to this website and get free gold, you can kind of pick up on that pretty quick.
Also, will there be any other webinars coming from Two Hat Security?
If this goes well, I would hope to do a lot. So we want to do that one on, so my brother's volunteered to do one on what made, some of his insights into Club Penguin and what made strong community. I think that would be really helpful. Please send us your list of topics if you have key topics. We also want to get special guest speakers. So Carlos has a lot of really good friends in the industry through his behavior group. I'd love to see a lot of them sharing their insights from different elements. Also watch our blog. Kimberly from Riot just wrote had an amazing interview with Leah, and it was posted on the blog. So make sure you take a look at her notes. Brilliant insights that she had. Any other questions?
Anybody else wants to ask a question before we wrap up here? We still have some time.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for your time. It was a real fun and pleasure to be able to share this with you.
Yeah, and keep an eye out for a follow-up email. I'll have the presentation for you, probably a small little survey just to check how everything went. And yeah, thanks so much for coming for everyone. We super appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.